Tonight we're finishing up a conversation that we began last week. That conversation was about how we're supposed to live in the world. The conversation that we started last week really kind of gave us the impetus, the belief that we are supposed to live in the world as light in darkness, as hope to hopelessness, as joy to sorrow, and that among this campus community and even beyond graduation, we are supposed to make the world better. Jesus says that we are to be salt to the earth. We are to bring light to the world, to be set up as a city on a hill so that all men might see our good deeds and praise our Father up in heaven. Right? This is what the Bible teaches us. This is what Jesus says we are supposed to be. So when it comes to our Christianity is meant to be lived out in the public sphere. Some people in 2019 like to say, well, faith is a private sort of issue. And that's fine and well and good. It's just not biblical. Faith is meant to be a public issue because you cannot live your faith in isolation, because Jesus gave us two commandments. The first one is this: love God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength. And that is so good. We love that. But he gave us a second commandment. He says it's like it. You are to love your neighbor as yourself. And if your faith is a private endeavor, then you are neglecting the second commandment. And my question would be, can you even love God if you are not loving those that God loves, which isn't just you, by the way, it is the whole world? So if your faith is a private faith, then chances are you're kind of flubbing not one commandment, but two. And so tonight we're going to kind of go into that a little bit more, because I think that sometimes in our Christianity, but also in our public life, in our personal lives, as we think about our purpose in life, as we think about our futures and our careers, we kind of get tunnel vision. Especially at this point in the semester when our grades are kind of wonky, right? We kind of get tunnel vision about, okay, if I don't do this, or if I'm not in this this standing in my particular school or college, if I'm not in this particular club or group or whatever it is, then my life is ruined. I literally had a student say to me last semester, she said, if I don't get, and then she kind of filled in the details of her life, she said, then my life is over. And I said, what an indictment for a 20-year-old girl to say, that your life is over because you did not achieve X at 20 years old. Unfortunately, that's what so many of us believe. And so we hunker down. We kind of get this tunnel vision that says, I am going to do whatever it takes to get to the place that I need to get to, and anything else is just a distraction. Sometimes we make that assumption in our faith as well, don't we? Saying, if I can just do this, if I can just overcome this sin, and if I can just do this thing for God, and that is it. What I want to tell you tonight is that God may be wanting to break through your tunnel vision to give you a broader perspective about what God is doing in the world around you. God wants to break your tunnel vision so that you can have an eternal perspective of what God is doing in the world around you. Because the truth is, and this is a truth that I've had to come to terms with for myself, God isn't just concerned about me. And God isn't just concerned about, it's going to hurt, you. God is concerned about the whole world and the whole creation. And so if we are going to be the kind of people who are, as the scriptures talk about King David, are a people after God's own heart, then we must chase after the things that God's heart chases after. We must be thrilled by the things that thrill God's heart. We must be broken over the things that break God's heart, not just the things that thrill us or break us. Does that make sense? All right, so let's look at some scriptures here. I'm going to begin in Luke chapter 8. We're going to bounce around to 3 different scripture passages tonight, all right? I usually try to stick with one, but nope, not tonight. Luke chapter 8. And so we're going to start in verse 40, going to 56. And I want you to listen to this, because Jesus is doing typical Jesus things. And then Jesus gets interrupted. I love this story. It says, "Now when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. And then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12 years old, was dying." As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. So I mean, imagine like it's like game day, maybe like LSU day when all of Louisiana comes here, and it's like everybody's pressed against together, and we're all kind of smelling a little bit like corn dogs. It's just a rough time, right? No offense to LSU, but a little bit of offense. So it's kind of like that, but people are all pressing against Jesus. And it says that a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, and no one could heal her for 12 years. She came up behind him and she touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. And Jesus said, "Whoa, who touched me?" Everyone denied it, and Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." "You're in a crowd, Jesus." Like, there's a lot of people. Like, Jesus said, "No, someone touched me, because I know that power has gone out of me at this moment." And then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet, and in the presence of all the people, she told him why she had touched him and how she had instantly been healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." While Jesus was speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." And hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Do not be afraid. Just believe. She'll be healed." When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except for Peter, James, and John, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her outside. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She's not dead. She's asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." And her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. This is a fascinating passage, right? Because Jesus shows up late. Jesus is on his way to go and heal Jairus' daughter, and then he is interrupted. Interrupted by a woman that has been having an issue for 12 years that doctors cannot heal. There is no relief, there is no rest for this issue, and so she decides, if I've got a shot, maybe it's with this guy. I'm going to press through this crowd. I'm going to swim through this sea of people, and if I can just touch just the hem of his robe even, maybe, just maybe I can be healed. And as soon as it happens, Jesus does not say, "Oh, sorry, no time, glad you're healed. On the way to Jairus' house, I've got a mission here," tunnel vision. Instead, he says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, someone touched me." You can imagine Jairus at this moment, right? "Jesus, my little girl is dying. We've got to get to her quick because like time is of the essence." Jesus is like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, somebody touched me." "You're in a crowd, Jesus." "But no, somebody touched me." "Jairus, please, Master, let's go. I'm really stressed out here." "Jesus, who touched me? I'll wait." And the woman walks up and says, "Well, it was me." And instead of just kind of blessing her and going on his Jesus way, Jesus engages with her. He commends her faith. He spends a moment to talk with her. "Oh, look at this new miracle, everyone, let's celebrate this moment." And at that moment, someone from Jairus' home shows up and says, "We're too late. Your daughter just passed." I get so focused sometimes on the big picture plan. Sometimes I get so focused on the destination that I forget about the journey, right? I forget about all of the steps that lead to the destination. And sometimes I'm just like, especially when I was about 19 or 20 years old, I was just like, graduation is on the way, especially that senior year. I was like, oh, just a few more months and there's no more studying. There's no more of these core classes. There's no more math ever in my life again. Let me just get to graduation and I will be humanities forever. Just like, God, deliver me from evil and, math. I will serve you forever. That was my senior year in a lot of ways because I was hoping for the next thing. But this passage teaches me that God is in the distractions a lot of times. God's not waiting for us at the destination. God's with us right now, and He's pointing out all of the things around us if we would just get out of our tunnel vision for a moment and see His work. Do you have such a focus on your life, on what God is doing in you or through you, that you are neglecting what God is doing around you every single day? Part of my belief as a Methodist, but I would dare say that Christians everywhere believe this, even if we don't really live by it, but we believe in something called prevenient grace. Now, that's a big word. I get that, prevenient. It's not the kind of word that we use around campus day to day. But prevenient essentially means that which comes before. And so if it's grace, prevenient means grace that comes before. Comes before what? Comes before you realize it. Comes before you accept it. And as a believer in what's known as prevenient grace, I believe that God's grace is active and alive in every person on this campus, whether or not they know it. Therefore, day to day, I'm constantly looking and asking in this state of almost constant prayer, beginning when I wake up in the morning, when I get here on campus, I'm constantly saying, God, where are you at work today? Where are you among the students in my class today? Where are you in the students that I'm meeting over in the food court at the Ferg, or in Starbucks, or the other Starbucks, or the other Starbucks in town? Where are you among these people? And I'll tell you this, when I begin to focus on the day-to-day distractions that God may be providing around me, my whole world changes. For example, when I first moved here to town, one of those distractions came in the form of me going to Starbucks every single day. My big goal was to plant a church. I was going to plant a church, so every day I got up, I read my Bible, I prayed because you have to do that, and then I went to Starbucks because that's also what you have to do when you're starting a church. I would sit there and I would just kind of play on my little laptop and I would read my Bible or I would read some book about church planting, and then I would just watch people all day long. And I would be praying, God, where are you at work? Well, sometimes I would have fun conversations with random people that would walk by. Yes, I was that guy. Sometimes I would be sitting in the corner, I'd be watching people, and they would have, books, not Kindles at this point. This was just a few years ago, but nobody really was like fully embracing the digital Kindle ebook sort of thing at this point. So they still had books with covers that I could spy on. And I'm like, oh, let's look at this. And then as I noticed their cover, I would walk over and I would say, hey, is that a good book? Yes, I'm that guy, right? That no one really wants to talk to. But eventually, I would begin to have conversations with these people. Sometimes people would bring their dogs, which made me think, hey, people talk to people with dogs. Let me bring my dogs to Starbucks. I'll grab drinks or whatever, and then I'll have my dogs out here, and then people will just come up and pet, and then I will talk to them about life or whatever, and then eventually maybe ask them if they would like to start a church with me, because that's what we do, There's protocols for relationships and dating, and then for starting a church. And it's like, first meeting, it's like, oh, you seem pretty fun. Second meeting, let's go a little bit deeper. And then third one, we're going to DTR, be a member of my church. That is how my evangelism used to work, right? DTR is define the relationship, Jake. Just since you had that question. You're welcome. But that was the idea. What I didn't realize in all of this, because I was so focused on the let's build a church thing, was that every single day I would walk in and I would order my caramel macchiato, amen, or my iced caramel macchiato if it was a hot day, and then I would go and sit down. But every single day I would order these things, and it became my go-to drink, and the baristas really got to know me. And they were like, Wade, with the caramel macchiato, iced or hot today? And I was like, what's the temperature, y'all? And they're like, iced it is. And then I would take that and go. They got to know me to the point that one day the barista came over and sat down with me. And he said, Wade, you come in here all the time. I know that you're a pastor. I was like, yeah. And I would love to say that at that moment I led him to the Lord. No. It was so good. He said, my girlfriend and I are getting married, and I was wondering if you would perform the ceremony. And I was like, yeah, DTR. I was like, absolutely I will. Are you kidding me? And so I was like, but I've got some stipulations. We're going to do premarital counseling. We're going to do 3 sessions of it. He was like, great. And so I got to meet his fiance, got to meet their families, and I did the ceremony. It was a beautiful, cool moment that happened in spite of me. I didn't realize what God was doing with a barista because I was focused on the masses of people, the nameless, faceless people that came into Starbucks and out of Starbucks. But it was the barista. How many times have I neglected what God was trying to do around me because I had some sort of tunnel vision for what I wanted God to do in me? Have you ever neglected what God was actually doing because you were focused on what you wished God was doing? That's been me a lot of times in my life. There are moments in our lives that we take for granted. And I think that God is wanting us to open our eyes to some of these things. I was walking, I was on a study abroad trip. I was walking through the streets of Athens, Greece one time, which sounds kind of wild to even say, but we're walking down this sidewalk, and on the side of this building, there was a man. It was very, very cold. It was January of I guess, my junior year or sophomore year of college. And this man was huddled up and just kind of, he wasn't even begging. He was just on the side of the road, huddled in blankets and coats. And one by one, in my group of about 35, every one of us began to walk by this guy, and we would kind of sidestep him, kind of like the Good Samaritan story. We were all the bad ones. We would all sidestep. But I was carrying up kind of the rear of the line, and as following suit, I kind of sidestepped the guy. But right behind me was my instructor, a guy that has probably shaped me in at least the top 3, if not the most profound ways in my life. He was my instructor. His name was Bishop Morgan. So he was a bishop of the United Methodist Church, but he was also a bishop in residence at my college, and he took us on this study abroad trip. And he was right behind me, and as I was sidestepping and walking and just kind of going about my nice, big, fat Greece adventure, I hear him, he said, hey, it's pretty cold out here, isn't it? And I just kind of looked back, and he had gotten down, kind of hunched down like this, and he'd reached into his pocket, and he grabbed whatever change and bills that he had, and he just put it in the guy's hand. He said, you stay warm, okay? And he just kept walking after that. It took no time at all. And I don't know if Bishop Morgan thought another thought about that for the rest of his life, but I remember it because it took 10 seconds and some spare change to give that person on the side of the road that everyone had kind of sidestepped some humanity. We were on our way to the next destination, getting back on the bus to head to wherever else on our journey. But Bishop Morgan saw this distraction and took a moment to give personhood to this person. In my classes, because we mix video games and religion all the time, we call these sort of things side quests, right? So if you're used to video games, sometimes you've got the primary objective, then you've got little side objectives. And a lot of times the side objectives are a lot of fluff sort of stuff that is like totally optional. You don't really have to do it. But what I want to tell you tonight is that your main quest, your main story is totally informed by your optional little side journeys, your side quests. I was talking to Jamie, one of our grad students, the other day, and he was telling me this fascinating story about how he and his girlfriend were around this lake, and this woman came up to him very frantically, and she said, "Somebody, please, can you help me?" And he said, "What do you need?" Thinking that he might need to save a life. She said, "Can you fish?" And he said, "All right." And I'm butchering this story, Jamie. If you want the real version, you can talk to him later. But she says, there's some trash that I threw in the lake or something like that. Yeah. And she was like, "I can't reach it. I have some fishing equipment. Can you fish it out of the lake?" And he was like, "All right." So they spent some time, and he took this rod and he fished some trash out of the lake. Why? Because this woman was in crisis over some trash that might, I don't know, damage a turtle or something. Nonetheless, Jamie was like, "I'm here." What I love about that was that he was able to be there for that woman. What seems like a distraction and kind of silly to us now, it was a moment of connection. Whereas he could have just kept on going with whatever his day had included. What are your side quests? What are the things that you kind of just roll your eyes at or ignore, but maybe they're more important? Maybe it's helping someone who's broken down on the side of the road. Maybe it's helping your roommate run an errand that they really don't want to run. Because the truth is, your side quest may lead to a main quest. Your side story, your optional endeavor over here, may lead to your primary journey. And shoot, I know this better than anybody. The reason I am here is because I picked up that side quest. I was a freshman small group leader for a group of 4 freshman college students here at Wesley while I was planting a church. And over the course of that, I began to get more and more involved in college ministry. And then when there was a need here, I was like, okay, I'll take it, but only as a side gig. And I was supposed to be here for only maybe 6 months, maybe 9 months at max. And then it became my whole life. And I kept thinking, it's my side gig. It's my side gig. I'm building this church over here. I'm going to keep building this church over here. And the church kept dying, and the college ministry opportunities just kept on growing. And at the end of it, my side gig, my side hustle over here became my main thing. And then, once I got this thing over here with Wesley, I started getting different opportunities. I had no business teaching a class over in the Honors College. Started with 1 hour, moved up to 10, 11, 12 hours per semester. Why do I say that? Because there's a few of you in here tonight that may not have ever been here if you had not been part of my side quest at the university. And my question is, who is forgotten by you not taking those side opportunities? Who are you missing in your world who might need your words of grace, love, and presence because you have tunnel vision? It's important for me to share with you a consequence of when we don't do this well, and it comes from John chapter 11. This is a familiar passage. It's the story of when Jesus has a friend named Lazarus, and Lazarus is very ill. And Jesus shows up a few days late because Lazarus dies. He seems to have a knack for this, does he not? And so I'm going to begin in 11:17 of the Gospel of John. It says, "On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem." Bethany is a city, not a person. And many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother Lazarus. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Which is weird, because he's Jesus, and Martha and Mary are friends of Jesus. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now that God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she replied. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. And after this, she went back and called to her sister Mary. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly, went to him. And Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house were comforting her, they noticed how quickly she got up and went out. They followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there, and they were going to join in the mourning. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, and you can imagine that she falls apart. And she says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's a little bit of a different tone than Martha's. If you had been here, he would not have died. Jesus saw her weeping, as well as the Jews that had come along with her, and he was deeply moved in spirit, and he was troubled. He said, where have you laid him? Come and see, Lord, they all replied, and Jesus wept. Oh, don't miss that. Jesus wept with all of the people that were also weeping. Sometimes we get this idea of God having all of the plans, all of the eternity, past, present, and future, and God's just sitting up there watching us in our struggles and our joys, and he's totally emotionless. But this shows us that that's not who Jesus is. Jesus weeps with us. Jesus celebrates with us. Even though Jesus knows what is coming, Jesus still weeps with them in the moment. And the Jews said, look how much he loved his friend. But some of them said, could he who opened the eyes of the blind man not have kept this man from dying? And maybe you know the rest of the story. Jesus goes to the tomb and he says to his friend, Lazarus, come forth. Lazarus, come forth. And Lazarus rises and comes out. But what I want to point out here is this very potent moment. If you had been here, he would not have died. The truth is, at least for me, I wonder how many times that I've missed out on actually being there with a world and in situations that could have used some Jesus because I had tunnel vision. And I'll tell you, as I was preparing the sermon, I was thinking back to my 8th grade year. I had a guy in my class from maybe about 5th grade on or so. I didn't know him that well. Sometimes we were in the same class. Didn't really talk to him very much. But I found out one Monday morning when I was in science class that over the weekend that he had taken his own life. Which for an 8th grader is a pretty sobering moment, of course. But I didn't really know him. But I remember him now. And even now, so many years later, I wonder, what would have happened if I had maybe talked to him a little bit more, reached out to him? Because even to this day, I have no idea what was going on in his life. I have no idea what was going on in his family. I have no idea what his mental state was. And I mean, who can blame me? I was a 5th through 8th grader during my opportunity for that. And I'll tell you, there's been times in my life when I think I wish that I had someone here with me. And then there's people like Bishop Morgan who see me, and they don't see me as a distraction from their main goal, but they see me as the main goal, even though I am no more than a side character in their lives. And they saved my life. People like Bishop Morgan, people like other pastors that I've had, other friends that I've had who could have easily just kind of looked the other way. If they had not been there, I would be in that tomb. The good news is that even when we neglect those side stories, that God is the God of resurrection. He's the resurrection and the life. The book of James, James chapter 2, says to us, you show me your faith by what you do. Faith without works is dead. You say you believe, great, wonderful. James chapter 2 tells us, what good is it if you see someone in need and simply say, be well? Offer your prayers for that person. Well wishes. Going to put a nice Facebook post. Hey, this is super sad. Emoji. James says, you tell me about your faith, I'll show you my faith by what I do. You'll know by the things that I do. So what does that even look like? What it means, for me at least, is that every day I'm constantly scanning to see where might God be active. Because the answer is God's active with everyone, but where is an opportunity for me to join in with what God is doing? Several weeks ago, I read a story from this book. I'm going to read a portion of it to you. Because I think that even though the situation is different, it might spur us to some ideas as to how we can be present in the world around us. How we can notice, how we can utilize distractions to find our primary purpose. It says that Kathy Fletcher and David Simpson have a son named Santi who went to public school in Washington, D.C. Santi had a friend named James who sometimes went to bed hungry. Maybe a distraction, right? So Santi invited him to occasionally sleep over at his house. James had a friend, and that kid had a friend, and so on and so forth. Now, if you go to Kathy and David's house on any given Thursday night today, there will be about 26 kids sitting around that dinner table. There are generally 4 or 5 living with Kathy and David or with other families nearby. Every summer, Kathy and David round up a caravan and take about 40 kids out of the city for a vacation on Cape Cod. Simply by responding to the needs around them, Kathy and David are now at the center of a sprawling extended family. I started going to dinner at Kathy and David's house sometime early in 2014, invited by a mutual friend. I walked in the door and was greeted by a tall, charismatic man named Ed, with 2 Ds, who had dreadlocks dripping over soulful eyes. I held out my hand to shake his hand, and Ed said, "Whoa, we don't shake hands here, we hug here." I'm not naturally a huggy guy, but so began what has so far been 5 years of hugging. We normally gather around the table on Thursdays to eat, but in reality, we gather to feed a much deeper hunger. The meal is always the same, spicy chicken and black rice. Cell phones are banned. Be in the now, Kathy says. And about a third of the way through the meal, we go around the table and each person says one thing they are grateful for, something nobody knows about them or some other piece of information about their life at that moment. There are frequent celebrations. Somebody passed the GED exam, got a job, graduated from barber school. People also throw more complicated things on the table too. A 17-year-old girl dealing with pregnancy, another young woman with a failing kidney, and Medicaid refuses to pay the cost of a new one. A young man announces he's bisexual, and another admits that he is depressed. One day, a new arrival sat at the table and told us that though she is now 21, she hadn't sat at a dinner table since she was 11. Most of our conversations are pure affirmation. People have had enough crap in their lives and need to hear how valuable they are, how much loved and needed they are. But often we just tell jokes and laugh, and the kids sing in their chairs. I brought my daughter one day, and as she walked out, she told me that is the warmest place I've ever been to in my life. After the meal, we head over to the piano. Somebody will play an Adele song, and people will sing. But the dinner table is the key technology of social intimacy here. It's a tool we use to bond, connect, commit. I've learned to never underestimate the power of that dinner table. It's the stage on which we turn toward one another for love, like flowers seeking the sun. "Thank you for seeing the light in me," one woman said to Kathy one night. The adults come from the emotionally avoidant world of Washington, D.C., and they get to shed their armor for a little bit. The kids come from the streets, and they call Kathy and David mom and dad as their chosen parents. The kids around the table have been through some normal traumas of poverty in America. Some have been homeless. Some have traveled through the foster care system. The theme of male cruelty runs through their histories. Some father or other male figure may have abused them, abandoned them, or misled them, but they are enmeshed now. Bill, who founded the organization Communities in Schools, came to the table one night. He's in his 70s now. I've been working in this field for 50 years, and I've never seen a program turn around a life. Only relationships turn lives around. And that's what's happening around this table. You wouldn't know it if you were white and over 35, but Washington, D.C. is a fantastic place to be if you're an artist, black, or under 25. The kids who come to dinner are connected to this underground art scene as poets, painters, DJs, singers, something else. We adults in the group provide them an audience in front of which they can realize their talents. Their gift to us is a complete intolerance of social distance. Emotional combustion happens in the most mysterious ways. No one can really trace the chemical processes by which love bursts into flame in one community and not another, but it's here in this community, and all of us have been transformed in some surprising ways. David, for example, gave up his job, and he now works with the kids full-time. Kathy organizes arts programs across America, but comes home and has another full-time vocation waiting. For years, the adults told the kids that they could go to college, so when they began coming of age, they took Kathy and David up on the offer, and now we all have to find a way to pay for them. Kathy and David set up a nonprofit called AOK, which stands for All Our Kids. We are all deeply embedded now, giving each other helping hands. And it is because Kathy and David responded simply to a need. Kathy grew up in a large Catholic family, so she's used to having a large, loving mess of people around. When she's asked how she could possibly host that many young people, she looks out uncomprehendingly. "How is it that you don't?" she asks. Kathy and David are exhausted a lot of the time, as you can imagine. Maybe you're a parent trying to look after 2 or 3 kids. Imagine what a day is intertwined with 40. One of the kids has lost a cell phone or smashed his bike. Sometimes real crises hit. In 2018, Kathy and David had to race against time after Medicaid refused to pay for a kidney transplant for one of the young women. Everybody mobilized to get Medicaid to reverse their decision, which it did. Fortunately, we had a donor. David gave one of his kidneys to Madeline. The exhaustion comes with its compensations. Kathy and David are now enmeshed in dozens of loving relationships. They sometimes ask themselves if there's a better way to do the work they do, but they don't have to ask themselves if they're doing anything valuable with their lives. They know. After you've fallen in love with Kasari or James or Kaliko or Taruk or Thalia, it's not even a question. These are young people of infinite depth and promise. The chance to be with them is just what you do. This is what life of love and care and commitment looks like. And it's the antidote to what is wrong with much of our culture. That entire story started with a distraction. Their son made friends with someone in need. And they took the side quest, and it became their main world. Don't neglect the distractions in your life, because God may be using those distractions to lead you to something phenomenal. In a moment, we'll sing a closing song. And after that, you'll go to Spark groups. And I'd actually like to give you a gift tonight that hopefully will remind you of this. Several years ago, I went to China, and I was on a mission trip, and part of it was an educational sort of thing to learn about China, but it was also to kind of teach in schools. So I worked with children primarily and a little bit with educators, and we tried to teach people in China, students, children particularly, about Christian values and morals, and kind of encourage some of the churches that were over there. The church is pretty oppressed in China. In fact, I read just the other day that a large megachurch that was holding services this weekend was destroyed in the middle of their service just because the Chinese government could. Sometimes they flex their power on the churches because the churches pose a threat to them. Anyway, we walked into this one church, and the principal or the headmaster walked up to us, and he greeted us in a peculiar way. He said, "Hello, brother. Hello, sister." And I was like, well, okay, that's maybe a cultural thing, but we were told later, no, that is the way that a lot of people in high positions, like headmasters and principals, identify themselves as brothers or sisters in Christ. And so we knew that this was a Christian brother at this point. And he began to tell us about the way that he ran his school. And he led us into this giant foyer in this lobby, and he showed us this huge mural. And on this mural was this phrase that said, "For you, 1,000 times over." And he said, this is what we try to instill in our students, that their lives matter, not just for themselves, but for others. And if they can live for others, then you would not just do it once or twice, but you would do it 1,000 times over. That if we give of ourselves and serve others rather than expecting to be served, that's the way to life. So tonight, we're going to give you a gift. It's a small wristband that simply says, "For you, 1,000 times over." And my hope is that as you walk on this campus or in every situation that you meet, that you would always remember that Jesus gave himself for you, and he would do it 1,000 times over. And in the same way, maybe you can give yourself for others, to serve them rather than to be served, and that you would do it 1,000 times over. Let's pray together.